All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph. To thank Mrs. Selma Woolf for dedicating all the Shiurim and drushos this month with immense gratitude for the refuos from Hashem and the merit of refuah sheleima for all of those in need and the zchus of our brave soldiers and the return of our hostages. The Schwarzbaum Family in memory of Rabbi Schwarzbaum, Aharon Yosef, Meir, and the Lavine and Behrman families in memory of William Zev Shmuel Ben Yisroel. And of course, we dedicate all of Maseches Bava Kamma Nishmas, Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush Hashem Yikom Damo. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Neshama. So with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Hy'd Aleph. We have a lot to do today. 111. We have a lot to do today. And we are picking up on Hy'd Amud Beis 110b. And we are picking up, I believe, at where did we leave off? Rabbi Zeir. Perfect. So we'll say, so pretty much like right in the middle of the page. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines up from before it gets wide. So also remember again, we're dealing with a very fundamental yesodistic question, which has to do with the following discussion. When the Kohanim, right, we've been talking about the concept that if a ger dies, ger dies, and ultimately, yes, remember again, Reuben stole from ger, we'll just call him ger. Reuben stole from ger, swore that he didn't. Ger dies, then Reuben admits that he stole from ger. So the halach is he has to pay keren, chomesh, and asham. The asham is a carbon, gets offered up on the mizbeach, and the keren and the chomesh go to the kohanim. And again, we've discussed again which kohanim it goes to, the kohanim of the particular mishmar. So now the Gemara is trying to figure out the question of what exactly is the nature of the kohanim's right in that keren and that chomesh. Are kohanim like yarshim? Are they like inheritors? Or is this gezel hager considered to be one of the matnos kahuna? One of the kohanic gifts. And we saw again in Afkamina that the Gemara, practical difference the Gemara gave was, again, what happens if he stole chametz, and now it's chametz sha'avar alav pesach. If the kohen is like a yoresh, then again, you get what you get, right? Then ultimately, again, Reuben could come, show up to the base of Mikdash, give them the chametz sha'avar alav pesach, and even though now it's worthless, it is what it is. If on the other hand, it's a matnos kuna, it's one of the kohanic gifts, then ultimately Reuben would be obligated to actually make financial restitution in the amount of the value of the item that he stole at the time that he stole it. So Rabbi Zeir Bari Hachi. So Rabbi Zeir asked the question the following way. If you say that Gezel Hager is like one of the matnos kuna, halo ibailan, dahi matana. Then ultimately again, then this will be treated like a matana. The Gemara says, Amrachmana, denei sivlahu. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Zeir seems to feel that ultimately, again, in general, it would have one of the status of the matnos kahuna. The shaila is more like this. So we'll say, really, Rabbi Zeir feels the question is as follows. What happens if Reuben stole 10 sheep? Right? We've always been focusing on that he stole money. Let's say he stole 10 sheep. So now what's the shaila? And now, again, so Reuben comes after the ger died, and he comes to give these 10 sheep to the kohanim, Gezel Hager. So mechayvi la'afusha minay meiser olo. Ultimately, again, is he obligated to go ahead and give them? Is the kohen obligated to tithe these animals or not? Interesting. So the Gemara says yarshin havu. So on one hand, do we see like they're inheritors? So both say on one hand, are the kohanim treated like the heirs? Are the kohanim treated like the heirs of the ger? If they are treated like the heirs of the ger, then again, when you inherit something, you are absolutely obligated to tithe it. O dilma bekabli matanasabu, or maybe again, it's considered to be like one of the matnos kahuna. Utnan halokeach banitan abu matana pater mimaiser behema. They will say, interestingly enough, in general, the halacha is that if you purchase something or something is given to you as a gift, it is pater from meiser behema. Now, again, the concept of purchasing something, we're not going to get into this right now. For our purposes, again, if you receive something as a gift, it is exempt from Meiser Behema. So we'll say, so now this sort of Zeir is just reframing the question a little bit. That again, if a kohen, let's say, gets 10 animals as part of Gezel Hager, is he obligated to tithe that or not? Is he obligated to tithe that or not? So on one hand, if he's like a Yerush inheritor, the answer is yes. If it's like a gift, the answer is no. So we'll say, so bottom line, the question still remains the same, which is at the end of the day, when Kohanim get this Gezel Hager, how do we treat it, right? How do we treat it? Is it treated ultimately, again, as an inheritance? They're the inheritors of the ger, or is it treated as a matana, as a gift, one of the kohanic portions, so to speak? So let's analyze. Well, this is actually a fascinating Gemara. Tashma. We'll say there are a total of 24 kohanic gifts that were given to the Kohanim, to Aaron and his sons. The kulan nitnu biklal uprat uklal. And I will say, Rashi points this out over here, that all of the matnos kahuna are really learned out from the exegetical principle of a klal uprat uklal. Right? Remember again, a klal, an inclusive statement, right? A prat, a specific statement, and then a klal, another general or inclusive statement. So the Gemara says, furthermore, and I will say, interestingly enough, at the end of the pasuk, also psukim, talking about the matnos kahuna, the Torah always makes reference to the bris melach, the salt covenant. Salt covenant. The idea whenever you see bris melach, just like salt, is so to speak eternal. So anytime you see the lashon of bris melach, that comes to highlight that this is an eternal covenant. So again, matnos kahuna. Take a quick look at Rashi. You can see over here, Beklalu Pratu Klal, L'chol Kodshe B'nei Yisrael L'cha Nesunim, L'vishcha, Klal, Zeh Yelecha, B'kod HaShakab Hashem Min HaEish, Prat, Kol Matana B'fnei Atzma, V'chol Truma, S'akadashim B'chazar HaKalal, Hadar Ksiv, U'bris Melach Olahu. So also, the idea over here is, again, the Gemara is pointing out, that Manos Kuna, in the Pasuk, were given in a state of Klalu Pratu Klal, and also, again, Bris Melach. Again, the salt covenant is mentioned in the context of Kohanic gifts. Now, why is that? This is incredible to teach us, Kala Mekaiman, we'll say first of the widest lines, to teach us that whoever upholds the 24 matnos kahuna, Kilu Mekayim Klal Uprat Uklal Ubris Melach. So it's actually a very dramatic statement, that whoever goes ahead and upholds and gives the Kohanic gifts, it's as if he has upheld the Klal Uprat Uklal. Now, Rashi points out to her, what does it mean? He says, as if he held up the klal u'prat u'klal, kol haTorah kula, shenitna lijosh b'klal u'prat u'klal, u'ki'ilu kiyem kol ha'kabano shenitla b'em bris melach. We'll say, get ready for this. When you give matnos kahuna, and you give the portions of the kohan, right, the gifts to the kohanim, it's as if you have upheld the entire Torah, klal u'prat u'klal, the entire Torah, and as if you have offered up all of the karbanos. Incredible. On the other hand, kala over alehem, kilo over al klal pratu klal bris melach. Conversely, if you don't uphold the 24 kohanic gifts, you don't give your matnos kuna, it's as if you have transgressed the entire Torah, and ultimately, again, you have not given, or you've desecrated all of the karbanos. So we'll say, so by the way, this by itself requires, obviously, a healthy dose of explanation. We're not going to give it a healthy dose of explanation, we'll just give it a little bit of explanation. What does this mean? You give the matnos kahuna, and it's as if you've upheld the entire Torah, offered up all of the karbanos. You go ahead and you don't give the matnos kahuna. It's as if you haven't upheld the Torah and not given the karbanos. Why is, in other words, matnos kahuna are important, but Lamaisa, why this level of importance? We'll say, so if you think perhaps just on a very basic level, if you think about matnos kahuna, we'll say, what do matnos kahuna demand of us? What do they demand of us? It demands of a person to take their stuff and ultimately, again, to share it to someone else. We'll say one of the hardest things to do in life is to be a charitable and giving person. Why? Because at the end of the day, I worked for my stuff. And I worked hard for my stuff. In order to be a charitable and giving person, what do you need? What do you need? More than anything, you need emunah. You need emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that emunah is a twofold emunah. The first part of the emunah is, number one, it's not my stuff. That's the first part of it. It's not my stuff. La Hashem ha'aretz umlo. Everything belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe Shalom put certain things in my custody, right? He put certain things in my care. But why does he put them in my care? Not simply for me to lavish them upon myself, but to do something with them. So that's number one. And number two, also Emunah teaches me that whatever you give, you will always get. Remember again, the whole yisod of tzedakah is aser b'shil shetit asher. Tzedakah is the only mitzvah you are permitted to perform, testing on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm going to give a lot of tzedakah on the condition that you give me a lot back. Do not try that with any other mitzvah, right? Never perform mitzvahs with testing on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedakah, is the one mitzvah you are allowed to test HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You are allowed to say, Ribono Shel Olam, I am going to extend myself. I am going to push myself, and in the zchus of me extending, I expect you. Literally, I expect you to not only give it back to me, but give me more. You're allowed to do that when it comes to the tzedakah. So we'll say, as such, we see that matnos kuna, which the paradigmatic example of tzedakah, we see represent this idea of emunah. So a person who has emunah, number one, that the wealth is not mine. Number two, that whatever I give, I will get. A person who has emunah, we'll say, if you have emunah, you have everything. If you have emunah, you have everything. So if I have emunah, it's as if I've gone ahead and offered up all of the kabbalos and kept the entire Torah. Conversely, if a person doesn't have emunah, they're going to be very reticent to give, very reticent to share. It's mine. And whatever I give you is less for me. A person who doesn't have emunah, let's say, if you don't have emunah, you don't have anything. If you don't have emunah, you don't have mitzvahs. If you don't have emunah, you don't have kabbalos. If you don't have emunah, I don't have anything in my life. Such a profound and incredibly dramatic Gemara. Let's go back to Elohim. These are the 24 gifts. Elohim. Eser b'mikdash. 4 of these gifts have to be eaten within the confines of the Beis Hamikdash itself. V'dal Yerushalayim. Another 4 of them have to be consumed within Yerushalayim, right? Yerushalayim, the city of Yerushalayim. V'eser b'gvulim. And 10 of them could even be consumed ultimately again outside of Yerushalayim altogether, just in Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say Eser b'mikdash. So what are the 10 Kohanic gifts that have to be consumed? We'll say this is actually a fun and beautiful Gemara. We'll kind of put a little asterisk over here. This is one of the ones that we have to come back to because this is just a great journey through Matnos Kahuna. So what are the 10 in the Beis Hamikdash? You'll say, I know, I love Bava Kamma. Big challenge is I always feel like I'm just always trying to catch my breath, right? There's always, Baruch Hashem, so much to pack in and so much to do. So I apologize, right? Eser b'mikdash. There are 10 gifts that have to be consumed in the Beis Hamikdash. Chatos behema, right? Chatos of an animal. Chatos ha'of. Asham vadai. Asham taloi. So again, these are different types of sin offerings, right? Remember again, Asham vadai is when you've definitively transgressed. Asham taloi, possibly transgressed. Zivchei shalmei tzibor, certain communal offerings. The lug shemesh shal mitzorah, the lug of the oil used in the purification of the mitzorah process. Mosar ha'omer, remember again, the omer is the barley offering. The leftover of the omer goes to the kohanim. Shtei halechem, the 2 loaves offered on Shavuos. V'lechem hapanim, lechem hapanim, remember again, is the bread placed on the shulchan that's exchanged every week, given to the outgoing shift. V'shiurim minachos, and any leftover of carbon minchos. Minachos, so these are 10 kohanic gifts that are consumed by the kohanim, but must be consumed within the confines of the Beis Hamikdash itself. Next, the Arab Yerushalayim. Another 4 could be consumed in Yerushalayim. What are those? Habachora, so Bechor animals. Bikurim, first fruits. Mura minat Toda, the sacrificial parts from the Toda. Ve'el Nazir, the Nazir's ram. Va'oros Kachim, and sacrificial hides. So all of those could be enjoyed ultimately again in Yerushalayim. Va'asara bigvulim, another 10 items, another 10 gifts could be enjoyed even outside of Yerushalayim. Trumas Meiser, right, which is a portion you take from Meiser. Chala, right, from the dough. Reishis Hagaz, first shearings. Matanos, these are generally the Kohanic gifts that are taken from any animal that you offer up. Pidyon Aben, Pidyon Petach Hamar, so right, the money from the redemption of the firstborn son. Right, Pidyon Petach Hamar, redemption of the firstborn donkey. Usteachuza, Steachuza means somebody consecrates their ancestral fields. They fail to go ahead and redeem it. The Gizbar temple treasurer goes ahead and sells it at Yovel. When everything reverts back, that does not go back to its original owner. It goes to the Kohanim. That's the Achuzah. Stei Charamim. Somebody makes their field. The Chirim. Gezel Hager. I'll say all of that was for this, right? That's it. 2 words. Gezel Hager. And I will say, and what's an example of one of the Matnos Kuna, which could be enjoyed even outside of the Beis Hamikdash? Gezel Hager, or even outside of Yerushalayim. And Rashi points out over here, Gezel Hager, 4 lines up from the bottom, Gezel Hager, Nami Kari Le Matnos Gvulin, Shem Nitnu Lekoina Mishmar Chutz Yerushalayim Yatza, Ve'el Hashem Yala Yerushalayim Lahakid. So what this means is like this. So let's go back to our case. If Ruvain, right, who stole from the Ger, swore that he didn't, the Ger died, now he admits that he swore, he has to pay Karen, Chomesh, and the Asham. If he meets the Kohen, in Tel Aviv, he can go ahead and give the Kohen, the Karen, and the Chomesh. and the asham. Obviously, the asham has to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash to be offered there. But the restitution, so to speak, to the Kohen could be made even outside of Yerushalayim. So we'll say, what do you see from here? V'kakari mihas matana. We'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that Gezel Hager is called one of the matnos kuhuna. It's called one of the Kohanic gifts. So shmamina mekabli matanos havu shmamina. So we'll say, ultimately, again, see from here that halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, they are called mekabli matanos, and ultimately, again, not yarshim. So we'll say, just to kind of plug this back in, what this would mean, therefore, halacha l'maisa is both of the cases that the Gemara mentioned before, which is if the Gezel Hager consisted of 10 animals, because it's a matana, ultimately the Kohen would not be obligated to tithe it. Conversely, if the Gezel Hager represented now chametz sha'avar alav Pesach, Reuven would not be permitted to drop off a loaf of bread at the Beis Hamikdash. Rather, he would be obligated to pay the value of the theft as it was at the time it was stolen. So we'll say a very important halacha l'maisa nugget, that ultimately, again, Gezel Hager is considered to be one of the 24 Kohanic gifts. Incredible. Let's say, I just point out something, also a good Mosar Haskell in this. Let's say, sometimes in life, you go through a lot of process, right? Just in order to come out with one small idea, one small takeaway, one small piece of inspiration, or one small, life nugget. So Gemara goes through all of this. Why? For 2 words. You could have just said, by the way, Gezel Hager is a matana, right? That's it. But again, we'll say this is life. That sometimes to walk away with something that looks relatively small, you have to go through a relatively large journey. Okay, Sigmar goes weiter. I'm Rabbi. So I'm sorry. Nasan esa kesef la'anshei mishmar. So I'm Rabbi. Shmamina kesef mechaper mechza. Di lo mechaper mechza havamina mahadel yarshan. So we'll say, remember again this case over here where if halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah said that let's say Reuven went ahead and gave the money to the Kohanim, but then died before he offered up the asham. So what did the Gemara say? Reuven's kids can't get the money back from the Kohanim. Right? They can't get the money back. Once it's been given, it's been given. Even though, again, remember, what was the previous case? The previous case was Reuven was on his way up to Yerushalayim to give the money to the Kohanim. But what happened? He died. In that case, what's the halacha? The kids keep the money because there's no longer any need for kapara. The difference just is once he's given the money to the Kohanim, as much as he has not yet offered up the asham, the kids could say, hey, our dad is dead. He never went ahead and, our father died. I don't need to get right into the monetary issues. But Lamaisa, again, he doesn't need the kapara anymore, so give us back the money. Mishnah says, no, it doesn't work that way. Once the money's been given, the money's been given. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? So Gemara says, you see from here that the giving of the money itself affects partial atonement. Why? Because we'll say if the giving of the money, even without the asham, didn't affect partial atonement, then ultimately, again, you should give it back to the kids. In other words, if the giving of the money to the Kohanim didn't affect atonement at all, then when the father dies before having offered up the asham, let the Kohanim give the money back to the kids. Because we'll see, you can say like this. Why did Reuven give the money to the Kohanim? In order to affect kapara. If it turns out that kapara wasn't affected, then what? Then the Kohanim should return the money back to the kids, because that's not why Reuven gave them the money. Elamai, the fact that they don't return the money indicates to us that the giving of the money itself affects a partial kapara. So the Gemara says, Elamiata. So if that's the case, look at the following case. Chatas shemesu ba'ala. Why don't you say, if Reuven was going to bring a chatos, right? And Reuven died before he was able to offer it up. It should go to chulin. It should revert back to being a mundane animal. After all, now remember, we know what's the halacha with chatos shemesu bala. What's the halacha? So ultimately, it's left to die. But why? Why don't we say it wasn't Reuven's kavana? To have Reuven's kavana when separating this animal was that it should be offered up as a carbon. If it's offered up as a carbon, great. If it's not offered up as a carbon, then at the end of the day, it should just go ahead and revert back to being chulin. Don't bring this proof because remember again I will say the halacha of chata shemesu ba'ala, that if you have a chatas whose owner died, that animal is left to die, that is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, so you can't really argue on that. So what about an asham? So for example, in our case, I will say, remember again, what happens if Ruvain, same case, Gezla Ger, Ruvain dies, Ruvain Seber had the Asham and died before being able to offer up the Asham. What happens to the animal? Remember we saw in the Mishnah, what happens to the animal? And the animal is left to graze, ultimately until it develops a mum. Once it develops a mum, then it's sold off, and the money is used to purchase a nidava. So why don't we say, I don't understand, Ruvain was makdish this animal with the intention of going ahead and offering it up. If that doesn't materialize, let the animal revert back to chulin. To which the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, Asham nami hilchasa gemirila, kol shebechatas mesa ba'asham roa. No, because Asham is kind of like a sister to chatas. So in any case where a chatas is left to die, the halacha Moshe Misinai tells us that a Asham is left to graze until it develops a mum, and is then redeemed with the money still being used for sacrificial purposes. Elamiyata. So we'll say, all the Gemara is just trying to prove is this concept that it must be that money goes ahead and accomplishes partial kapara. Why? Because if it wasn't so, the kids should really get back the money, because they should be able to say, our father never had intention that the money should just rest with the kohanim if it's not going to affect kapara. If the money's not going to do anything, then the money should go to us. But you see from the fact that the money doesn't go back to the kids, that the money does affect partial kapara. So the Gemara is just trying to challenge this assertion that if you don't have in mind for something, it reverts back to its original status. The Gemara is trying to question this. Elamiyata, here's an interesting case. Yivama shenafa lefnei muka shchin, teipok below chalitza, da'adaiti dahachilo, kitsha atzma. So we'll say, listen to this. So Reuven's married to Rachel. Reuven dies without children. Rachel falls to Reuven's brother Shimon. Shimon is a muka shchin. He's covered in boils. So ultimately, again, Rachel should be able to emerge from this without chalitza. Why? Because one can make the pretty cogent argument that she never had das. In other words, she never had das that her kiddushin should ultimately allow her to come to be a yavama to Shimon, who's covered in boils. So if that's the case, again, she should go out without chalitza. To which the Gemara says that's not true. Hasam anan sadibas, in the case of kiddushin, top of kuf yud aleph, demenach la bekolduhu. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, now literally this translated, it means that Rachel is happy with anyone. They will say, now what does that mean, Rachel's happy with anyone? Kid Reish Lakish, to Reish Lakish says, Tav lemesav tandu, me lemesav armala. That a woman would rather be with anyone than to be alone. Now let's analyze this statement a little bit. Take a look at Rashi. Tap Rashi 111a. Demenach nechaluhu lizkadesh lerishon shu shalem al safek zeshem yamos tizakek leachal. So we'll say, what the Gemara is saying is like this. In general, every woman when she gets married knows that what? There's the possibility of yibum. Right? So what does she do? She does a cost-benefit analysis. She sees Shimon, but she also really likes Reuven. Reuven's a good guy. So therefore, again, she kind of has this risk-benefit analysis that at the end of the day, I'd rather take my chances, knowing that there's a slight possibility that I'll come to be a Yavama to Shimon. But again, for me, that risk is worth it in order to go ahead and marry Reuven. So again, the way Reish Lakish phrases it is, it's better to be with someone than to be with no one. What that means, the way the Gemara is using that is, she is okay taking the risk about what may happen in a Yibum situation because it's worth it for her to have this marriage. Okay, beautiful. So let's go back there. So Nasan Esakesef, Eliyahu Yarif. So we'll say, so remember again, we then got into the interesting case in the Mishnah of what happens if you end up, so remember, Reuven shows up to the Beis HaMikdash. He's going ahead and he's giving two things, right? He's giving, three things. Keren, Chomesh, and Asham. The idea is who you're giving it to. You're giving it to the Kohanic group on shift, right? The Mishmar, who's currently on call. The Mishnah then dealt with an interesting case of what happens if you end up giving the money and the carbon to two different mishmoros. What happens in that situation? So let's deal with that now a little bit. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanon. Actually, really very interesting case over here. Nas Tana Rabbanon. Nasan Asham Eliyahu Yariv v'kesef liyadai. So remember again, just the order as we saw it already in yesterday's daf. The order in yesterday's daf is that the mishmar. I just want to get, the Mishmar of Yehoyariv comes before the Mishmar of Yedaya, right? Yehoyariv are the first Mishmar. So what happens? So Nasan Asham li Yehoyariv v'kesef liyadai. Now, I will say now one more important piece of information over here. that remember, ideally, the order is important. Meaning what? Really, what are you supposed to do? When Reuben shows up in the Beis Hamikdash, what's the proper order of atonement? Right? Give your money, then give your carbon. Kesef comes, which again, logically makes sense. You're coming to atone for the fact that you stole from someone. So karbanos are very nice. Even better than karbanos, money. Right? Give back that which you stole. So remember, therefore the order is important over here. So now watch what happened over here. Shabbos say in this case there's two things happening over here. Number one, Reuben gives the asham, he gives the carbon to the shift of Yehoyarov, which is the first shift, and the money to Yedaya, money to the next shift. Shabbos say, so now two different shifts received it. Now let's assume right now that everything is extant. Right? Everything is still there. No one's offered up the carbon. The money hasn't been spent. So what do you do? So listen to this. Yachser kesav eitza asham de Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that Yedaya, who received the money, should give the money to Yehoyariv. In other words, the money should follow the carbon. Whoever is in possession of the carbon, those are the ones who should get the money as well. Yachser kesef eitzel asham de Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda holds Yedaya, second shift, should give the money to Yehoyariv, the first shift. The Chum say no. Yachser asham eitzel kesef. It's very interesting. The Chum say no. No, in fact, again, rather, the asham, the carbon, should be given where the money is. So therefore, again, Yehoyariv should take the carbon and give it to Yedaya, who has the money. Okay, so what's going on over here? Watch this. So if we're talking about that Reuven showed up and he gave the asham to Yehoyariv when Yehoyariv was on shift. Right? They were the mishmar, and the kesef, the Yedaya, and mishmar to the Yedaya, and then he went ahead, he came back next week, right? And he gave the money to Yedaya when Yedaya was on shift. And I don't understand. Zeh zacha b'shalo, v'zeh zacha b'shalo. So we'll say, I don't understand why this is such a problem, right? Because each group acquired their own thing. Amar Rav, no. Malcolm asking, what's the case over here? To Yov Ashim liYehoyariv b'mishmarto Yehoyariv, v'kesef liyedaya b'mishmarto Yehoyariv. So Rav says, no, what happened over here? What happened over here, both say, is it was Yehoyariv's shift. So you gave Yehoyariv the asham. That's fine, it's their shift. But for some reason, Reuben gave Yedaya the money, even though it was Yehoyariv's shift. So he gave the money to the wrong shift. So Rabbi Yehuda Sabar, so both say, now this is machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda Sabar, Kevan delav mishmaras the Yedaya, who the Yedaya kansin alei, hilchach yakser kesef eitzel asham. So both say, Rabbi Yehuda Shita makes a lot of sense. Rabbi Yehuda says, listen, Yedaya, guys, it's not your shift. It's not your shift. So you shouldn't have accepted that money. Now that you received it, you need to give that money back to Yehoyariv, or not back. You need to give that money to Yehoyariv because it's their shift. Okay, so we'll say, pretty straightforward case. So what's the Rabbanan? Rabbanan Sabri, watch this. Rabbanan Sabri, Shelo kedin hu ava b'nei Yehoyariv, the kiblu asham mikabei kesef, hilchach lidido kansin lehu v'yachzer asham eitzel kesef. We'll say, watch this. Rabbanan say, no. Who does the fault lie with? The fault lies with Yehoyariv. Why? Yehoyariv, you know the order. The order is money first, asham second. You should not have accepted the asham before Reuven paid the money. So because you accepted the asham first, you're therefore in violation of the proper order. We penalize you. And therefore, Yehoyariv, you have to hand over the asham to Yedaya, even though what? It's not Yedaya's mishmar. Now, obviously, then Yedaya will wait to offer up the carbon until it's their shift. So I'll say, so this is the fundamental machlokes. You have Rabbi Yehuda penalizing Yedaya for accepting money that they should not have accepted. Therefore, give it to Yehoyariv, who has the asham, and you have the Rabbanan, the Chachamim, penalizing Yehoyariv. Why did you accept an asham when payment hasn't been made? Incredible. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Amar Rabbi, Tanya, Amar Rabbi, the Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Im Kidmu Yehoyariv Vekrivu HaAsham. So we'll say, now watch this. This is actually very interesting. So Rabbi says like this, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if Yehoyariv went and offered up the Asham, so we'll say, so now remember again, Yehoyariv received the Asham, didn't receive the money. Therefore, if Yehoyariv were to go ahead and offer up the Asham, Yachsor V'yavi Asham Acher, V'yakrivu B'nei Yedaya. So we'll say, really then, remember, so if Yehoyariv offered up the asham before the money's been paid, then we'll say what has to happen? Reuven has to bring another asham, give that over to Yedaya, right? And this way Yedaya will have both the money and the asham. V'zachu alalu b'mash shebiyadan. And ultimately again, and Yedaya, so we'll say, now, zachu halalu b'mash shebiyadan ultimately means that Yehoyariv will also benefit from the asham that they went ahead and offered up. So the Gemara says, Amri, l'may chazi asham basalhu. I don't understand, how are Yehoyariv benefiting from this asham? It's an asham basal. Amarava, lioro. While it's true, you can't consume its meat, but l'may said they will benefit from the hide. Okay, Tanya, Amar Rebbe, the Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, according to the words of Rabbi Yehuda, so im kiyem asham, yachzir asham eitzel kasef. So I'll say, so now remember again, I'll say, let's say, according to Rabbi Yehuda, let's say in a case where Yehoyariv didn't offer up the asham, right? They have it, they didn't offer, so what should they do? They should give it over to Yedaya. They should give it over to Yedaya. So the Gemara says, Yaksha Asham Eitzel Kesef. V'ha Rabbi Yehuda. But that's not true. For Rabbi Yehuda Kesef Eitzel Asham Islay. But that's not what Rabbi Yehuda said. Rabbi Yehuda said that actually the money should follow the Asham. So in fact, Yedaya should give the money to Yehoyariv. Hachamayaskina, what's the case over here? Kegon dinafak mishmarto di Yehoyariv velo tavo. Velo tavo. So we'll say, what's the case? Over the case is where Yehoyariv kind of left their shift, and ultimately, again, no one claimed the money from them. I have a hakamash malan da'achule achilu gabayhu. So we'll say, what do we see from here? That sometimes the mishmoros can be mochel, right? They can forgive things one to the other. Another brayso on Amar Rebbe, the Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, im kiyem asham yachzor kesef eitzel asham. So Rabbi Yehuda says, if the asham is still in existence, in other words, if Yedaya didn't offer up the carbon, then ultimately, again, if Yehoyariv did not offer up the carbon, then Yedaya should give the money back to Yehoyariv. So the Gemara says, Pshita. So the Gemara says, Hachi Islay. So the Gemara says, Hachi Islay. Hacham asking, what's the case over here? Kigon denafak mishmar tom dahani, v'dahani lo tavu. We'll say you might have thought that again. We're talking about a case over here where Yehoyariv's their mishmar ended. They left the Beis HaMikdash. And meanwhile, again, there was no claim one against the other. So you might have thought, Dahani v'dahani lo tavu, ma'udetema. We'll say first wide line, not of the widest lines, intermediate wide lines, ma'udetema, achule gabi hadadi. You might have thought that ultimately, again, if Yehoyariv leaves the Beis HaMikdash, and they made no claim against Yedaya, then maybe, again, they just forgave the claim. Kamash malon, daminan kivan de lo tavi lahadu beresha. No, because we say since there was even though there was no official claim, nevertheless put things back as they really should be, and therefore again the money should be returned to Yehoyariv because the money follows the asham. So we'll say the way we paskin. So just there's really two variations of this case, right? So really what's happening over here, the way the Gemara is setting it up is Ruvain is giving the asham to Yehoyariv during the mishmar of Yehoyariv and giving the money to Yedaya not during the mishmar of Yehoyariv. I'm sorry. And giving the money to Yedaya during the mishmar of Yehoyariv as well. So the money is being given to the wrong mishmar. So what do you do in such a situation like that? So we'll say, so b'pashtos, if everything is still in existence, so the halacha is that Yedaya give the money to Yehoyariv. That's the way we paskin. Essentially, Yachzer Kesef Eitzel Asham, right? Then the money goes ahead and follows. The money is given back ultimately again to Yehoyariv. And again, they both say the logic over there is actually a very simple one. What's the logic? It's Yehoyariv's shift. It's Yehoyariv's shift, right? Yehoyariv's shift, and Allah said they're entitled to everything. Yedaya got the money inappropriately, so therefore the money goes ultimately to Yehoyariv. Where it becomes a bit more complicated is where let's say Yehoyariv received the asham, they offered the asham. So we'll say, so now in this case that triggers the previous halacha in the Mishnah, that remember again that if the carbon is offered up without the receipt of money, then what's the halacha? The carbon is no good. In that case, again, we would go ahead and cause Ruvain to have to go ahead and bring another carbon. But Bepashos, he would end up doing that with the mishmar of Yedaya, which means then Yedaya would keep the money and also have the asham as well. Okay. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Shemevi gzela achlo hevi ashamo. So then the Mishnah said, if you bring your carbon, if Reuben brings his asham without paying back the money, the asham is meaningless. Right? You can't bring the carbon without paying back the money. So the Gemara said, where do we know this from? So Amar Amar Kra, ha'asham hamushav la'Hashem la'koin milvad ela kipurim she'ei chaper bo. So we'll say the way the pasuk is structured is the pasuk essentially first speaks out payment and then speaks out the carbon. Michlal the kesef bereisha. So was the pasuk itself was speaking about the process, speaks out ha'asham. Remember again, we established in yesterday's daf. What's the asham? The asham in that, right? Asham in the pasuk refers to Karen, right? The end of the pasuk, milvat ela kiborim bo. That's the carbon. That's the carbon. So you see that monetary restitution is mentioned before the carbon. As such, money must be given before the carbon is offered. Michlal the case of Reisha. So we'll say if that's the case, now we'll say, so what's interesting over here is, what the Gemara is really seizing on is, it says, Ha'asham mushav la'asham la'kohen, milvad, in addition to the carbon that's going to be offered, or aside from the carbon that's going to be offered. So the way the Gemara's understanding is, the money's mentioned first, milvad teaches you in addition, but in addition means first money, and then in addition carbon. So the Gemara says, so, elami'ata, milvad olas haboker. What about by the carbon musaf? Right? When the pasuk says milvad olas haboker sher li olas hatamid, does that mean that the musaf comes before the tamid shel shachar? Right? The Gemara says sahachin nami michlal de musafim bereisha. So does milvad teach about say? So therefore, does milvad mean that whatever is mentioned in the pasuk comes second, and whatever was mentioned prior comes first? Well, carbon musaf is mentioned in this context before tamid shel shachar, the morning communal offering. So you're telling me then that the carbon musaf is offered up before the tamid shel shachar. So what we learned, Vatanya, minay shlo yehi davar kodem l'tamid shel shachar. We'll say first the widest line. How do you know that nothing should ever be offered up before the tamid shel shachar? Talmud lomar va'arach ala ola va'marava ha'ola ola rishon amrali ana me'ashay yechaper bo nafkale va'adayin lo kiper. So Moses says, I learned it out ultimately again from Asheich Chupar Bo, and ultimately again Kapara has not yet been affected. So Moses says, essentially, he says, you're right, we learn out from a different pasuk. Asheich Chupar Bo, you will get atonement. You will get atonement, which tells you that what? Which tells you that even once you've given the money, ultimately atonement has not yet been affected. When is atonement affected? Only after the carbon has been offered. So Moses says, so bottom line, Halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says, money comes first, but l'maisa, atonement is not fully affected until the carbon is offered up, right? But yet, if you were to offer up the carbon first, that would not work. Okay, let's go back there. No, Karen. So also, however, the Mishnah did say, if you give Karen, right? Let's say Reuven paid back the Karen, but he didn't pay back the Chomesh. So that does not hold up kapara. So you could have kapara even if Chomesh is outstanding. So the Gemara says, Tana bara minayin shem hevi me'ilaso, v'lo hevi ashamo v'lo hevi me'ilaso, shelo yatsa. So we'll say, so how do you know? Now this is talking about, we're switching gears over a little bit to me'ilah. Talking about a person who, remember, what is me'ilah? Me'ilah is illegal benefit from consecrated property. When you go ahead and you commit me'ilah chas v'shalom, so what's the halacha? You have to pay back keren, principal, plus a chomesh, an additional fifth. And we'll say, in this context, the lashon of heavy me'ilaso, he brought his me'ilah. Me'ilah refers to keren, refers to principal, and ashamo refers to the chomesh. So when repaying your me'ilah liability, how do we know? Shem hevi me'ilaso v'lo hevi ashamo, that if you paid back principal, but you didn't pay back the fifth, or ashamo v'lo hevi me'ilaso, or you paid back the fifth, but you did not pay back the keren, shelo yatsa, that you have not yet discharged your obligation. Talmud lomar be'el ha'asham v'nislach lo. So we'll say, because Torah used lashon be'el ha'asham v'nislach lo, that ultimately, again, slicha and kapara, Rashi says over here, mashma in slicha ela b'shneim. So full forgiveness is only achieved both through keren and chomesh. Uminayim shem hevi hashama at shlo hevi mi'ilaso shlo yatsa. And how do you know if you pay back the fifth, but you didn't pay back principal, that you have not fulfilled your obligation? Talmud lomar be'el ha'asham bikvar. So ultimately, again, it says be'el ha'asham ba'asham bikvar, meaning assuming that you have already repaid your principal. Yachol kishim she'el va'asham ma'akvim kach chomesh ma'akiv. So I would say that just in the same way that the karbanos, Rashi says over here be'el ha'asham mashma ba'ayel shuba b'chova la'asham shu keren. I'm a Karen Bereisha Maisi. Okay, so you might have thought Yachol Kashim Sha'al Ba'asham Ma'akvim Kach Chomesh Ma'akiv. So you would have thought the same way that El Ba'asham is Ma'akiv, so too Chomesh is Ma'akiv, and there could be no kapara without Chomesh. Talmud lomar Be'el Ha'asham V'nislach Lo. Ayel Va'asham Ma'akvim Behekdish. So Ayel and Asham are Ma'akiv by Hekdish. Ve'in Chomesh Ma'akiv. but the repayment of the additional penalty fifth is not ma'akev. So the Gemara says, "V'yilamed hekdish mehedyot, behedyot mehekdish." And also we can learn on hekdish from unconsecrated things, hedyot, and unconsecrated items from hekdish. How so? So what do you learn now from hekdish mehedyot? Ma asham dahasam karen, af asham dahacha karen. So we'll say, so first of all, just like by hekdish, right? Just like by hekdish. Sorry, this is hekdish mehedyot. Ma asham, right? Just like I will say, we saw by gezel ager. That what does asham mean? What does asham mean? Asham means karen. So too by hekdish, ultimately, asham means karen as well. Asham dacha karen. The hedyot me hekdish. And I can learn now hedyot from hekdish. Ma hekdish ein chomish ma'akev. Just like by hekdish, the bringing of the penalty fifth is not ma'akev the kapara, does not hold back the kapara. Af hedyot nami ein chomesh ma'akev. So too by hedyot. Rabbi say the case of hedyot as gezel ager, chomesh is not ma'akev. So Rabbi say, bottom line, again, the takeaway from here is that again. So we remember what's fascinating about the sugya Rabbi say is actually the halacha l'maisa really is pretty clear, right? So when Reuven wants. So again, if we kind of tie this all together. Reuven stole from Ger, right? Swore that he did not steal. Ger dies. Now Reuven admits that he lied. What's the halacha? 3-prong liability. Karen chomesh asham. Where does he do? Who gets that? Who gets it? And I remember again. What's interesting about this is there's no claimant. The Ger is dead. Who is the claimant? The Ribono Shalom. Right? La Hashem, La Kohen comes to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu gives it to the Kohanim. Which Kohanim get it? The particular mishmar that's on duty. It's his obligation now is come to the Beis HaMikdash to give it to the mishmar. The halacha is the way there is a process. There is an order to kapara. What's the order? Money, right? Karen, chomesh, and then asham. If you went ahead and you mixed up the order, as long as everything is extant, it's not a problem. If Reuven died on the way up, never gave the money, then what's the halacha? The money becomes property of the Yarshim. If he gave the money to the Kohanim and then died before the carbon was offered, what's the halacha? Kohanim keep the money, carbon goes ahead and is left to graze until it develops a mum, then redeemed money used for shlomim. You see from here that even the giving of the money itself affects a quasi-kapara. If you go ahead and, then we saw all the sugyas regarding giving it to the different shifts. If you went ahead and you reversed the order, so remember again, asham by itself does not go ahead and affect kapar, to the point that if you gave the asham, and the kohanim offered up the asham before you went ahead and you gave the money, what's the halacha? You have to bring another asham. What's the status of that asham they offered up? Status would be an asham pasal. Even though it's an asham pasal, they can't eat it, but what do they get? They go ahead and they get the Hy'd. And again, the last piece of halacha is very important. What is the status of gezel ager? Gezel ager is considered to be one of the 24 matnos kahuna. Why is that important? It's important because as a matnos kahuna, it is meiser exempt, right? It is tithe exempt, it's tax exempt, so to speak. One of the matnos kahuna bosai. Hadron halacha goes laitzim shkoyach. Incredible. All right, I'm a base. Now, this is the proper size of the page of Gemara. I just want to point out, right? This is the way Gemara is supposed to look. So here we go. Hagozel umachil asbanas. Well, it's an interesting case. So now, we'll say, this is not gezel ager. I mean, it can be gezel ager, but again, simple case of gozel. So Reuven steals umachil asbanov, and he used the gezel to go ahead and support his kids. Machil asbanov v'niach lifnehem. And he left it to them. Rashi says over here, Oshe niach lifnehem hagzila kayeres. So we'll say, there's really two cases in one over here. So Reuven stole something. He supported his kids. I don't mean to make this sound like a sob story, right? But the point is that Reuven stole and he used it to support his family. And the stolen object is still in existence when Reuven died. Right? So wherever he stole a cow and he used the milk and he used everything to support his kids. Now he died and the cow is there. What's the halacha? Petura milashalim. The children do not have an obligation to pay back the stolen item. Now, again, this already requires a lot of discussion. Now, I will say, now, this is an interesting phrase as well. If it's an item that has achrayis, I will say now, generally, a davar sheish bo achrayis means real property. So we'll have to see exactly. So it sounds like if it's real property, they are obligated to pay back. Okay, a lot to unpack over here. I'm Rav Chisda. Gazal v'lo nesei shabalim. So Rav Chisda says an interesting halacha. Reuven steals from Shimon. Shimon did not have Yeush. Right? Which means, again, Shimon did not give up on retrieving his item, and therefore did not relinquish ownership over his item. So Gazal, so Ruvain stole from Shimon. Now watch this. Now let's just take a simple case, right? Ruvain went ahead and stole a sheep from Shimon. Okay, Shimon did not have Yeush. Levi comes along, and Levi goes ahead and shears the sheep and uses its wool. Okay. So what's the halacha now? So now we'll say, let's say Shimon gets back his sheep. Now obviously, the sheep is woolless. So ratza mizegova. This is actually interesting. So Shimon, the victim, has the ability to sue either Ruvain or Levi for compensation. Right? Why? Ruvain is the thief, and Levi benefit from something that was not his. So therefore, again, when Shimon is looking for repayment, Shimon could go after either Ruvain or Levi. Ratza mizegova. So the Gemara says, by time, well, what's the reason? Because kol kamdol and very simple. Because as long as the owner of the object has not experienced Yeush, therefore the object is still in his domain. So therefore, Ruvain is a thief. And when Levi took the wool, so we'll say, here's what's interesting. Levi taking the wool from that sheep that Ruvain stole from Shimon is no different than Levi going into Shimon's property and shearing Shimon's sheep. So either way, both of these individuals illegally benefited from something that is owned still by Shimon, and therefore Shimon has the ability to sue for compensation either from Ruvain or from Levi. Why? Because as long as the owner has not had Yeush, the animal is still in his domain. Okay? Beautiful. Now watch this. Let's contrast that with the Mishnah. Tanan. Hagozl ma'acheles banav nechles neim peturim milashalim. You know what say? What did the Mishnah say? Ruvain steals a sheep. And what happens? He dies. And now what happens? His children inherit him. And what's included in the Yerusha? What's in the Yerusha? A sheep that their father Ruvain stole. But according to what we just said, what should be that? And yet the Mishnah said that's what? The children are not obligated to pay back the stolen item. But I don't understand. We just said before that as long as the owner has not had Yeush, that object still remains in his possession, which means that Ruvain's kids, right? Ruvain's kids have a sheep in their possession that doesn't belong to them. It belongs to Shimon. So why aren't they obligated to give it back? So Tiyufra the Rav Chisda, this obviously refutes Rav Chisda's position. I'm the Rav Chisda, Kitanya hi la'achar Yeush. Interesting. So Rav Chisda says, no, the Mishnah must be talking about a situation where Shimon had Yeush. Right? We're talking about a situation where the owner ultimately experienced Yeush, and therefore halacha lamaisa. In that case, the kids, the Yarshim of Ruvain, are permitted to keep the sheep. But enachinami, if they were to know that the owner, Shimon, did not have Yeush, they would be obligated to pay back the sheep. Very interesting. Okay. So let's analyze this. So now again, same case, right? Ruvain stole from Shimon, then Ruvain dies, leaves behind an object. The Mishnah indicates that the children are not obligated to pay back. So remember again, now the way we just set it up, at least when Rav Chisda, is it's talking about a case of after Yeush. Right? The original owner Shimon despaired of ever retrieving his object. There was Yeush, and therefore again, heirs are not obligated to go ahead and repay the item. This tells us, Rishus Yorej ki Rishus Lokeach Dami. Shabbos says, so what this tells me is that when children inherit the property of their father, they almost become like purchasers. Now what does this mean? Take a quick look at Rashi. So Rishus Yorej ki Rishus Lokeach Dami, v'havide ki Rishus Acheres. In other words, when children inherit property, it's almost as if this property is transferring to a totally different legal domain. The kevan do kimna lamaslisin la'achar Yeush kani lahu yasev Yeush shini rishus tibiyeush kedi lo kani the lo katem p'trum. So it's like it must be like this. We've set up now. The Mishnah is talking about a case of after Yeush, right? So Ruvain stole the object. Shimon had Yeush. Ruvain dies, and the item now passes down to his heirs. So Rabbi say we saw this before in our Yeush sugyos that Yeush by itself is not enough to affect acquisition. It has to be Yeush and shini rishus, a change of domain. So I must say that when children inherit their father, that is considered to be a change of domain. That children are almost considered to be like purchasers from their father. So now I have Yeush of the owner, change of domain as affected by inheritance, and that's why the kids, the Yarshim of Ruvain, are permitted to keep the stolen object. Okay. So the Gemara says, Rava says, Rishus Yorish Lav Kirishus Lokechta. Rava says no. Rather, an inheritor's domain is not considered to be like a purchase. Inheritors are not considered to be a separate rishus than their father. So we'll say if that's the case over here, so then why don't the Yarshim have to return the stolen object? What's the case over here? Interesting. The case over here, we'll say, is where the Yarshim consumed the object. Right? They came back after the Levaya, everybody was hungry, so what did they do? They shechted the sheep. Right? The sheep is no longer there. They ate the sheep. So we'll say now, in this case where they ate the sheep, obviously we'll say Shimon can't make a claim on Reuven's kids. Why not? Reuven's kids didn't steal it. We didn't know. We had no idea. So therefore, again, the case is where they ate it. They consumed it. If they consumed it, there's nothing to pay back with anymore. 1 second. Remember again, the Seifa of the Mishnah said, which we'll talk about, that if it was a davar sheish bo achrayus, which we seem to meant real property, or at least an item that's in existence, michlal, the reisha b'gzela kayam esaskinon. Sounds like the first case the Mishnah is talking about a case where the stolen item is still in existence. So how can you say it's a case where they consumed it? Rava says this is what it means to say. Oh, all right. So here we go. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara seems to say, if halacha l'maisa, the father left for them achrayis nechasim. Now what does that mean? What that means is like this. The achrayis nechasim the Gemara wants to suggest doesn't refer to the stolen object. What it means is like this. If Technically speaking, if, right, Reuven stole, let's just play this out, right? Reuven stole, and he left the object to his children. If the object is in existence, then what should the kids do? What should they do? They should go out and they should return it. What happens if they consumed the item? So now we'll say, what is their liability? So the Gemara wants to suggest, or Rava wants to suggest, it depends. What does it depend on? If the father left behind real property, then the kids should really repay the stolen object from the real property. Now, what's the logic of that? The logic of that is Reuven as a thief. When Reuven stole, he has an obligation of restitution. That obligation of restitution vests upon his real property. His real property becomes encumbered to pay back that which he stole. If he did not do so during his lifetime, that lien against real property still remains. So even when his kids inherit the real property, they should make restitution to the real property. We'll stop over here for today. We're going to pick up with it's really a fascinating sugya about the obligation of heirs to repay the stolen property of their father. And we're going to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach.